Sharon, it's you again to talk to us about Emily, which I think might have.
Emily.
Oh, what?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Emily.
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 Yeah, which I think might have. Well, actually, I don't know. Maybe I'm just saying it's about women. Therefore, it should must have some similarities. But it may have. Tell me, does this have any similarities with suffragettes?
In some ways, it does. Yeah, because this is the precursor to that movement. So this is not in the 1840s.
Yeah.
So this is about Emily Bronte.
Mm-hmm.
And Emily Bronte, some of you may not know, but Emily Bronte was part of a family who grew up at Haworth Parsonage in North Yorkshire, in not North Yorkshire, in Yorkshire. I think it's West Yorkshire, in Yorkshire. They were the children of a parson in a country parish church, and it's on the edge of the moors. And the extraordinary thing about this one family is they had six children, but four of them basically went on to do extraordinary things. One was less so, but their three daughters in particular, the three daughters that lived, they had two that died. The three that lived in particular went on to produce from this one small parsonage um, Charlotte Bronte, who wrote Jane Eyre, and Shirley and Villette and the Professor. You've got Anne Bronte, who wrote what has been described as the first feminist novel, The Tenant of Wildfowl Hall, as well as Agnes Grey. And then you've got Emily Bronte, who wrote Wuthering Heights, which by anyone's standard is an extraordinary novel. So this one small place inspired this sort of great works of fiction. And people have been fascinated by the Bronte, and they had their brother Bramwell, who had the potential to be as great as his sisters. He was an artist, he was a poet, he was I think what else he was, but he had potential. But his potential basically got lost in opium and drink.
uh,
So you see their potential is fulfilled, even though they're in this stifled existence. And he had the potential of going out into the world, and yet every opportunity he had, he frittered away by
mm.
self-indulgence. And so it's an interesting contrast between he could have done whatever he wanted to, but he didn't. Yet these girls who were in this really confined existence managed to achieve these amazing literary feats.
So that's good. But from what I understand about this film takes a bit of a different tact.
Absolutely, yes. So people have been fascinated for years by the Brontes. People have been trying to work out what made them tick. How did this small parsonage, because I've been there and it is small,
Yeah.
how did this one small party produce all this? And this is a film where we don't really know because they didn't write diaries as such. But all we know about them is a few letters, which are later some of their family members burnt some of their letters. So some of their letters and their works of fiction. So it leaves a lot for the imagination to sort of fill in the gaps. And
Yeah.
this is a film where filmmaker Frances O'Connor, who is an actress that we know from things like Mr. Selfridge and a Jane Austen adaptation of Mansfield Park, she has basically written, I don't know if she wrote it, but she certainly directed this film where they have filled in the gaps. They have created a story around Emily Bronte and about how she could have created um, Wuthering Heights. Now, Wuthering Heights is this mad, bad, dangerous to know Heathcliff
Oh yeah.
and Catherine Earnshaw, and they have this sort of like tangled love-hate relationship where they go from loving each other passionately and deathlessly um, to not being able to bear each other, and they sort of hurt each other and hurt everyone around them, but they have this sort of deep, love.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to understand how could this young woman in this tiny place write such this an extraordinary novel, so violent, so passionate, so extraordinary, so weird. How could she write that? So this is a story where they have created a story around it. So they've given the focus is on Emily, so all her sisters and her siblings sort of fade into the background a little bit. Apart from Bramwell, you see him and their relationship, and how they imagine how Bramwell's indulgences, his love of drink and opium, how maybe that could have influenced Emily possibly. Would she have experimented with drink and drugs as well?
Yeah.
And how in this household of mainly these young girls, every now and then you would get these curates would join the parsonage to work in the church along with their father, and how a young man away from home would he be attracted maybe to the young daughters of the house. And so they explores because this novel is so passionate. They're saying, would Emily have had a passionate relationship to which she would inspire to write someone like Heathcliff. Could she imagine that character, or would it be based on someone she may have encountered? So you see the story of Wuthering Heights, and they play out scenes that we know from Wuthering Heights, where sometimes the character who plays Emily is Catherine, and sometimes she's Heathcliff. So you can see how they have thought, how would you get this character from this woman? So they've created all these scenarios where you could see this is the birth of Wuthering Heights.
Oh, okay, now, Sharon. Out of all of us, I would say you are the most. You're the what do you call it? You're the book fan.
You're the book. Yeah, you're the
book fan. I was gonna say you're the most literature. I couldn't think of a word, but you're the book fan. So I'm sure that you've read Wuthering Heights. If there's going to be a book adaptation, you're the one who's going to be able to say, not like the book. They changed that, all that kind of stuff.
Are they called bibliophiles?
A bibliophile, yeah, someone who loves books. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good word, Sean. Good word.
Thank you.
So, Sharon, you are our bibliophile. And so with that, and I've heard some criticism about this film that has, because obviously that essentially said something along the lines of, that they're going, well, she possibly couldn't have had an imagination. She must have just have written down what happened to her. And that has annoyed some people because they're trying to sort of say that, like, putting Emily Bronte in the Catherine thing and putting this guy who comes in the Heathcliff role and trying to sort of say that she lived it before he actually came. How did it work for you? Did that work for you, saying her life maybe inspired the book?
I understand what they were doing, because there's some scenes that were straight from Wuthering Heights. They've just recreated the scene. Some of them with her brother, and some of them with this man who, it's not a spoiler because in the film, he is her lover in the film. And I can see why they did it as a device. But for me, it's like, didn't matter to me that it wasn't based on her life, because this was clearly a work of fiction. They have a bit in the beginning where there's like a seance. And I think, knowing with the writings of the Brontes, they were not going to be, they were interested in the spiritual, but I can imagine how the children of a parsonage would probably be horrified by that goings on. But I found it interesting, and I found it, it didn't bother me, because almost from the beginning, you know that this is a work of fiction. This is not about the life of the Bronte sisters or the life of Emily Bronte, because, the order of which things have happened are different, because we know that Charlotte was published first, and so, but in this book, it was like Wuthering Heights was published first, and it became a great success. Whereas no, it wasn't. It was Charlotte was the literary success first, and so we know that the facts are different, and so and so that didn't bother me, but I found in some ways, yes. I could see why they've done it, why they say that the only way someone who could possibly imagine someone like Heathcliff was because they had a passionate relationship of their own. Whereas I think Jane Austen was single. She managed to write these amazing love stories. I think imagination isn't there's a lack of experience isn't a hamper to writing fiction in some ways.
Well, if you watch a film called Becoming Jane, it might argue with you.
And exactly, they always like to do these things in fiction, but on the whole, most people with a vivid imagination is because the more confined their lives are, often the more imaginative they become. So, and then living on the moors, I've walked across those moors because I have done the Bronte Pass pilgrimage, and you can imagine if this was your playground, you had the howling wind, you had the changing weather, you had the landscape, you would imagine something as passionate to meet that sort of landscape. And you listen and you read. They read widely, the Bronte sisters. They read everything they could get their hands on, and so their imagination was being fed constantly. So I don't think it's inconceivable that someone who hadn't had personal experience could yet still imagine these extraordinary things.
Right, cool. So how many stars would you give it?
Yeah, I liked it. It's quite a long film, and it can be gloomy in places because the life of the Bronte sisters wasn't a bunch of laughs. But bearing that in mind, I still really liked it. So I would give it a 4, because I thought it was, and I liked the characters who played the sisters. I think they always do. I always feel sorry for Charlotte because she's one of my, and I like Anne as well. They're two of my favourites of the Bronte, because I never really liked Wuthering Heights. But even saying that, I really liked it. So I thought, as a work of imagination, if you love the Brontes, the work of imagination is not a problem. So I liked it as a work of imagination and a work of a speculative fiction, in that I don't think these events that happened, but they still made an interesting watch and started to give you a sort of little insight into these. And if it gets someone to read the books, then do that.
Cool, good stuff. So that is Emily, 4 stars for Emily.